The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from the Idries Shah Anthology. If I say, the sun is shining, everyone knows what I mean. That is, they think that they do. Few, however, will realize when they hear that phrase that the sun is always shining, and that what makes it appear that it is not is the clouds which are interposed between it and us. For some purposes, it does not matter whether we know or take note of the facts about the weather. For others, it could make a very great difference. If it is to make the difference for us, we have to know it and to register it. The same principle holds good with respect to Sufism and ultimate reality. All I can say about the man to whom you have just referred is that he is the sort of man who would go to England because of the weather. I once asked a very wise man how he had developed the power of seeing through hypocrites and frauds, how it was that his assessments of people were so uncannily accurate. He said, "Most people listen to talk and mix hearsay and repute with it. All I do is to stop listening. I watch." It is easy to make hopes come true. Just live up to someone's expectations of you. People are always asking why they do not make more progress in their inward studies. The answer is simple for the detached observer. You cannot keep a crow and corn in the same field when the crow is hungry and the corn is sparse. Can you approach truth, do you think, if you cannot be honest about your own dishonesty? The moment you are born, you become a moving target for the world. You may be much more than this, but do you remember that you are a target as well? Are you ignorant enough to expect horsemanship from blacksmiths? People are always asking why we do not seek truth through the relics and records which are so abundant. They are, of course, people who forget that if you plant cheese, you will not harvest milk. Wisdom gives honor to nobility, and nobility to everything else. If you want to nourish your stupidity, try a little avarice. Education has its problems. This includes making the wise wiser and the foolish more foolish. As the air does not exist to be looked at, the Sufis do not exist except for practice. They do not exist for discussion. The imagination of the wise is truer than the knowledge of fools. Some years ago, I was asked on a radio program why, in a certain book which I had written, the Sufis always came out on top. Why did they never come unstuck, he wanted to know. I was at first surprised at such a prominent individual as my interviewer asking a question like that, when he could have thought out the answer for himself. But I assumed that it was rhetorical, and that he was giving me an opportunity of explaining for the duller listeners that the material was instructional, like a book of mathematical tables. The other day I met a well-known scholar for the first time. As soon as we were introduced, he said, "Chap interviewing you on the radio once made a telling point against you about Sufis always coming out on top. I noticed that you dodged the issue, but I couldn't help noticing that you had no answer." Just as some Western techniques and instruments of great promise, indiscriminately introduced and carelessly used, have harmed people in the East, so does the random and incomplete importation of Eastern ideas and practices often act adversely on people of the West. Listen to advice based on experience. It cost a great deal, but you are not charged for it. Yet the payment which you should make is to try to understand it. Claiming that anyone can get anywhere will get you anywhere in most human communities. What is perhaps worthy of remark, however, is that this will not get those communities anywhere. The knowledge of those without depth is like poor cloth. Put a patch on it here, and a rent appears elsewhere. Today I passed a public place where a number of people had collected. They were shouting abuse and accusations against the authorities for not taking any notice of legitimate complaints. If they are right, and the powers that be are so unjust, they will make no progress and get no justice. If they are wrong, they are themselves being unjust. So why do they do it? It can only be to make themselves feel better, that is, for at least partly selfish reasons. Perhaps if they thought this through, they might be able to evolve a strategy which would gain their objectives. But then, of course, how would they stimulate themselves? Someone has just said that people should have both a sense of justice and a capacity for heroism. This sounds well, but it ignores what is equally important: the use of these things. I know, for instance, at least one man who has a profound sense of justice and a heroic capacity to overcome it. People constantly ask for calm and comfort and for exercises and instructions. They clamour for advice and interviews. More often than not, they are in need of something else first, which alone will make what they want possible. If they would only ponder, they would soon see that they are rather like the traveller who wanted shade, but did not realize that he had first to find a tree to provide it. It may be unjust to expect wisdom from the foolish, but it is surely as unjust to expect the kind of foolishness which these people seek from the wise. "When," asked a youth of a Sufi master, "will I be ready to plan my own studies?" "At the precise moment," answered the sage, "when you have given up the idea of planning your own studies." My respected grandsire Jan Fishan Khan once said, "If you want to be owned by a tyrant, accept someone who only imagines that he can be a pupil." Every raisin may contain a pip. Can you have butter before you milk the cow? The least striking words or actions of a teacher are incomparably more precious than the greatnesses of anyone else. What a lot of people call wisdom is only ignorance carried on by other methods. It is easy to teach people how to argue. This is based on a tendency and can be developed very easily. You can even pick it up from others, given enough exposure to it. But how and when not to argue, that you have to learn for yourself. How sad that only hindsight proves the truth of aphorisms which one found it hard to accept many years ago. For instance, what a teacher told me over 30 years ago. Try to understand. If you cannot make progress in this, then obey. If you cannot obey, forget metaphysics altogether, for there is no alternative to either of these paths. Nothing is ever lost while even a single person remains to remind us of it. Anyone who says or writes anything which seems to conflict with the true or false beliefs of a community or any part of it deliberately accepts the risk of being misunderstood and vilified and perhaps punished. People are widely held to have the right to attack what they dislike. We have not yet, however, reached the stage where it is required that people understand, though they purport to describe, the roots of liking and of disliking. If writers were emperors of the world, I know what they would do first. They would make it a capital offence for anyone to say, ever again, either, "So you're a writer? Had anything published yet?" Or, "I have a great idea for a bestseller. I'll just tell you and you'll write it up for us, will you?" Our great teacher Bahuddin Naqshband of Bokhara on vanity. Vanity is that disease of the human whose first and major symptom is to blind the afflicted to its presence. Its second and other powerful symptom is to make the patient accuse others of vanity, while believing that himself shows every sign of modesty. People think that anything that amazes them must be important. The Sufi's task, however, is to stress the difference between the unusual and the significant. Some people rush so much that they would, if they could, get to Wednesday before Monday. Try always to do what you wish, and you will often sacrifice what you can do. A man I met at a reception in London said, "I am an expert on Idries Shah. Now I'd like to tell you all about him." He didn't understand what I was on about when I replied, "No, don't tell me all about him, just where he is at the moment." Another man, also recently encountered, was wearing clerical attire. I asked him what its purpose was. "Well, you see," he explained, "if the Lord were to come back to earth, he would know that I was his servant." Think about it. I still am. You asked why a teacher should have described you as an idiot. I can only say that it is for the same reason that a thermometer may describe a fever as 104 degrees Fahrenheit. You really cannot unify different creeds. but you can disunify what lies beyond all of them. People love to coin words, like the zoosphere for the kingdom of living things, so let me have my turn. To me, the totemist mentality is so widespread, whether people realize it or not, that the world should be renamed the iconosphere. Have you heard about the man who asked a demon to help him with a certain matter? The demon answered, "That which is given by demons is not help. That which is help is not given by demons." "There is only one thing wrong with your type of religion," said a dervish to a devotee, "and that it is you have to become a saint before you can practice it." Have you ever considered the Sufi adage, "Pointed bluntness, cold heat, long shortness, all have the same meaning as wise scholar"? A civil service committee was in session. A man called as a witness said, "I won't talk." The chairman asked, "What does he say?" The witness's lawyer stood up. "My client said that he has non-going, non-verbalization capability at this moment in time." "That's better," said the chairman. The key to what human beings are doing really is that they are looking for excitement. I cherish the indignation with which someone once said to me, "You are looking at me with a calmness bordering on the insulting." Someone asked me just now which Eastern saying the West is in most need of. How about, "If you have 2 shirts, sell one and buy a rose"? I used to quote much that I learnt when a thinker said to me, "You are fond of quoting Kurdish, Tibetan, and Armenian proverbs, my friend. My counsel is that you first look at what actually happened to all those peoples." Simplicity is more complicated than it looks. One of the world's greatest thinkers, such was his repute, telephoned me saying that he wanted to bring a man of wisdom to see me. I couldn't help saying that if the gentleman really was a man of wisdom, he would be unlikely to need to see me. If, on the other hand, he was not, I did not feel like seeing him. That was some time ago, and the great thinker is now dead. But for years afterwards, people would tell me how, after that conversation, he flew into a towering rage every time he heard my name. What is the value of the husk once the seed has sprouted? The lightest word of a teacher is more valuable than people realize. A bird dropped a feather, and 100 ants found shelter beneath it. Look at all the water trapped in an iceberg. Can you drink until it is melted? I don't claim to have originated this phrase or even to subscribe unreservedly to its implications, but you might like to know that there is a current saying in the Middle East: "Those whom God desires to drive mad, he first makes into Orientalists." It used to be considered profound to say, "Tell it like it is," until someone noted that if you can tell it at all, it isn't like that at all. Before you accept an offered kindness, reflect whether you will one day be reminded of it. People are always wondering why the piling of fact on fact from all sorts of sources, carried on by some researchers, yields so little. I can only quote the saying, "You can never find out the time in a clock shop." I can well imagine that few things would have delighted Sheikh Abdul Qadir Gilani, the great Sufi, more than a recent historian's assertion that there is no evidence that he ever really existed. Today I spoke to a man who was newly released from hospital after, as he put it, being driven crazy by a spiritual teacher. I asked him whether he had noticed anything unusual about the revered mentor's followers before he joined the cult. "Oh yes," he said, "but I had read in a London Sunday newspaper historical survey that very many of the early Christians appeared to their contemporaries to be completely mad. In fact, I doubt whether my late mentor has driven anything like as many people mad as at least some larger and more established systems regularly do, with little or no criticism of them." Ordinary life and conventionally evaluated experience is not so much a delusion as the father of a delusion. That delusion is that nothing equally important exists beyond it. A couple of decades ago, an influential Western politician came to see me. This week we met again, and he said that he would visit me once more. I looked up the note which I had made the first time. He had said, "You people from undeveloped countries with no experience or responsibility in world affairs have not the moral authority of a country like ours, with its world role and industrial future." I was curious to know what his ideas would be like, and when he came here yesterday I asked him to tape record a summary of his feelings on the subject of moral authority without mentioning my diary entry. This is what he has drafted on the piece of paper and read out, worth preserving because he is now ranked as one of the great contemporary world statesmen. Now that we can see the futility of infinite technological expansion, now that our country can no longer be accused of harbouring expansionist aims, it is we who have the moral authority to tell the other countries that their way should be towards low-level technology, even if it means a poorer life. What you put in the pot, they say, is what your ladle brings out. Human beings, operating instructions. 1. Activate brain. 2. Operate tongue, writing hand, etc. Considerable practice is necessary for best results. A caution: operating in reverse order often causes irreparable damage to the individual, to the environment, and to associated systems. In case of malfunction, run. Repairs and adjustments. Your friendly neighborhood repairman can usually do nothing, but since nobody believes this, everyone can have a lot of fun. By the time the facts are discovered, it is generally too late for anyone to have to take the blame. Replacements and spares, not recommended. Durability, maximum possible under existing circumstances. Attention, all it can get. Emotion clouding judgment, yes. Greed is the punishment of the foolish. Foolishness is the punishment of the greedy. To escape from this vicious circle, you have to work on both ends of the problem. You say that although you do not know or practice it, you recommend it to others. But surely there can be only two possible descriptions of those who sell lanterns to the blind. knaves, or fools. The complaint, made at a semi-public dinner by a university dignitary about me, I am told, should be endured in silence. If it were entirely personal, I would agree wholeheartedly with this advice. But the learned gentleman has represented his criticism as a judgment of Sufis, and therefore it is useful to inform him and others what the Sufi attitude is towards his outburst. Briefly, he feels rejected. He is on record as having said that even kings have been pleased to accept the honorary doctorate of this university. Idries Shah alone, showing Sophie hauteur, has seen fit to spurn our offer. This is what really happened. I was told that I was to be offered an honorary doctorate by that university. I was asked whether I would be available to accept the honour. A copy of the encomium to be read on the occasion was enclosed with the letter containing this information. I had to decline, partly because doctorates had been awarded for theses which were based only on outward observations of Sufis or supposed Sufis by that university. Further, the citation in my case claimed that I had helped to further this process. Now, if a credential in jam making were to be offered to someone who had simply observed jam externally, what would that recommendation be worth in the eyes of tasters of jam, let alone makers of it or others who had actually participated? I rejected the phrase, the ultimate legitimization of Sufism as a branch of study, as a distortion. If this is Sophie hauteur, so be it. But what is it to be called when none of the points which I have here brought out is mentioned by the illustrious academic who accuses me, or us? Not censorship or selective quotation, surely. When you know enough about your own thinking, you can judge the quality of others' assessments of it. You might be surprised to find how many people ascribe your dishonesty to stupidity, and what is only your foolishness to evil intent. Beware, certainly, of whomever tries to deceive you. Be even more wary, though, if you are tempted to deceive others or yourself. The beginning for the traveller on the path is to start to look for faults in himself which he previously sought in others, and to begin to perceive in others the merits which he formerly imagined to be his own. Envy is an upside-down condition, in which the lesser sees the greater as lesser, and the greater may treat the lesser as greater. When will it become forbidden to forbid? Have you noticed how many worthless comments begin with the words, "This is worthless"? Whoever really knows how to hide himself need never assume disguise, lock a door, or find a secret place. Whoever knows how to reveal himself also knows when and where to do so. You say that you do not want to know what you have decided to seek, but what you need to know. That is a very good beginning. It avoids, for example, the problem of the farmer who wanted to control the growth of his crops, and, when his wish was granted, modified the wind and the rain. But he got no yield, because he had no knowledge of the minerals in the soil. In doing my human duty to the utmost, I am indulging in the highest form of selfishness. That is, as someone remarked to me recently, you may be a martyr in putting up with me, but ultimately you are doing it for yourself. But the matter goes further than that. I can't forget that when I was in a similar position, whatever my teacher was deriving from enduring me only started to progress when I could feel and express both obedience and gratitude. Only the flavor of real obedience and real gratitude can fuel the progress of human beings. That is why hypocrites and theoreticians are so far from understanding so much. Whoever never says, "I am ignorant," is not only not a teacher, such a person has never even been a learner. Overheard at a party. I don't think that psychology has actually killed Christianity, but it certainly has hit it over the head. Wisdom can feel and understand what folly cannot see or even imagine. For every person who writes a book, there are 1,000 readers of books. Everyone knows that there are bad writers, but there are also bad readers, people who waste their own efforts and those of writers by imagining that literacy and a desire to consume are a sufficient preparation for reading, and that highly selective reading or absorption of this or that is specialization. One of the most important human tasks is to realize how often one is being emotional when one thinks the feeling is spiritual, and how frequently people who think that they are being good are simply being hypocritical. People are always asking the difference between spiritual groups and teaching bodies in the same field. What a pity that they usually don't want to hear the answer. This can be rendered through the ancient Chinese saying, "Give me a fish and you give me a meal. Teach me to fish and you feed me for a lifetime." People go to supposedly spiritual groups and get a kind of nourishment which they rightly, but sometimes too stridently, insist is of value. But they have to return again and again. This is being given the fish. If they were taught how to fish, helped with the means to spiritual understanding, that would be progress. Among the Sufis, it is worth noting, the spiritual experience is the mark of the beginner, as the classical writings attest. The adventures of Sufis are not to be found only in remote Asia and ancient times. Recently, a Sufi who had agreed to give a talk in a certain town in the West arrived at the railway station and looked for a taxi to take him to the hall where he was to speak. He found a railway porter and asked him to call a cab, for the time was getting short and the hall was far away. "I'm afraid I can't do that," said the porter. "You see, there's an important lecture being given tonight, and all the taxis have been booked for weeks." There are two chief forms of laziness. 1, not doing what one can, and 2, doing only what one wants to do. The truth may hurt, the lie may please. Should you therefore avoid the one and adopt the other? Certainly, if you are working only in the field of social relationships. There are 6 stages in Sufi development which may be perceived through words. First, a man asks what a Sufi is. Second, he says that he need not be a Sufi. Third, that he wants to become a Sufi. Fourth, he says that he is a Sufi. Fifth, he says that he is not a Sufi. Sixth, he arrives at the point when he can say that he is a Sufi again, but he does not want to say it. You are the guardian of your secret. Reveal it, and you become its prisoner. People become disgruntled when they insist, inwardly, on regarding themselves as consumers, and when you do not allow them to consume, because you realize that they need not be constantly infantile, or because they don't recognize consumption in all its aspects. When I was a small boy, a Sufi took me to a football game and told me to study how the teams trained for their matches. He said, "One day you will visit the countries where this game was originally developed. You will be amazed that the people there have forgotten in many subjects that to get the fruits of a study, they must respect, obey, and follow its established patterns. Those who can recall this, or who can learn it anew, will be able to find what they need. Most of them, however, want the goal but try to ignore the prior need for method. Since the instructor knows the method, we respect him over all others. Seek such people as I have mentioned. Most of those who seek you, however, will be the others." Your remark is impressive, but valuable, if at all, only to yourself, like meditating naked on the roof on a cold, wet night. Remove desire from thought, and you will have understanding. Those who have no hope can easily find some. It comes of itself through patience. A mind without inner knowledge is a body without food. Anger and placidity are both first signs of madness. It is not for nothing that the tongue is a prisoner in the mouth. To refuse to learn is aggression against oneself. When you are ignorant, cynicism or suspicion are diseases. If you must envy, envy the good. If your desire is granted, you will be cured. A Sufi was asked, "Is there any good which people do not crave, or any evil not to be forgiven?" He said, "Yes. The first is humility, the second is pride." If you really know the branch, you know the root. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.